So on Twitter, we've got Papa's Mind, who's writing, "Congrats on this news being dropped on the day of your podcast. We have high expectations for a good show now." Well, Papa's Mind, or Papa le Frère, Arpin and I are going to do our best on this special edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook. Special not because it's Friday, so we were supposed to record a podcast, but it's special because of the circumstances with Sean Monahan being traded to the Winnipeg Jets. The timing, the fact that it's done like so quickly after Lindholm might be surprising. The fact that they were able to fetch a first-round pick might be surprising to an extent. But the destination, Winnipeg, is not a surprise.
No, it couldn't be less surprising, honestly. And you know, Ken Hughes, we just finished listening to him talk to explain, and said that the Lindholm deal that sent Elias Lindholm from Calgary to Vancouver accelerated this process, and that teams that were in on Lindholm now shifted their attention. Basically how we all thought it would play out. So really, again, the Canadiens, it's worth mentioning, and I tweeted this after the Lindholm trade, but the Canadiens really should send Jim Rutherford a gift basket of some sort.
Yeah.
His tendency to kind of jump the market and get things going early allowed the Canadiens to make this deal when they did. Obviously, Sean Monahan to the Winnipeg Jets for their 2024 first-round pick, and an unlikely but possible third-round pick in 2027 if the Jets happen to win the Stanley Cup this year. But really, the first-round pick, there's a lot of angles to this that we'll get into here. But Jim Rutherford doing what he did when he did it, which is what he always does. Whenever he's in a position to buy, he usually is the first one that sets the market on whatever team he's running. Did it again with this Lindholm deal. Sending the package that Vancouver sent, which was obviously a far more robust package. Just to recap for the listeners, maybe who didn't catch that, but the Flames got the Canucks first round pick this year, two defense prospects, one of which is a bit more alluring than the other, Hunter Brustevich. Am I saying that right?
Brustevich, yeah.
Brustevich, yeah. So he's ripping up the OHL right now, puck-moving, right-shot defenseman, and another pick, a fourth, if I'm not mistaken. So, a bunch of assets. And, and I forgot about Kuzmenko. Who scored 39 goals last year. So, Lindholm was obviously a far more attractive option, despite the similarity in their numbers this season, than Monahan was. But, I think we made it clear in the last episode how unlikely it might have been, based on past history, for the Canadiens to get a first-round pick for Monahan alone. Last year, a similar trade would have required some sort of package leaving the Canadiens. That didn't happen. They still got their first-round pick. So I think Ken Hughes, again, owes some thanks to Jim Rutherford, but deserves some credit for pulling the trigger when he did, because he got what he wanted.
The first thing that popped in my mind when I saw the deal is, the Jets must have been on Lindholm, obviously, and Monahan was considered plan B for all those other teams that were looking to add at the center position. But I wondered if, a team says, okay, we want to improve, we want to get better at center, and we're willing to give this and that. And for all those teams that are ready to give up a first round pick, it's like, mentally, were they at a point, or Kevin Cheveldayoff, was he at a point where he says, I'm willing to give up my first to get better? And even if it's not for Lindholm, but it's for the second best, if I want to make sure that I'm going to be the one getting the second best option, I'm fine with giving it up, because it clearly set the market for Monahan. At least it helped define, the parameters in which it would be that trade could be done.
Well, so, I think every general manager in the league has a basic understanding of the laws of supply and demand, and so when the supply goes down, the demand or the price goes up. So with Lindholm off the market, Monahan quite clearly was the most attractive center option out there. I mean, Adam Henrique is out there, but at a far greater cap hit, which even if the Ducks were to retain 50% on Henrique, it's still more than Monahan is being paid, or Monahan's cap hit unretained by the Canadiens, which we'll get to in a sec. It's an important factor of this trade. So when the center market is so thin, because after Henrique, it's basically non-existent as we speak right now. And I think Kent Hughes was good to point out that, at this same point last year, Matthias Ekholm wasn't necessarily on the market. And so the defense market didn't take him into account, or Dmitry Orlov wasn't necessarily on the market, and the defense market didn't really necessarily take that into account. And both those players fetched first round picks prior to the deadline, but late January, early February, that wasn't the case. So with the market being what it is right at this moment, Cheveldayoff obviously had to make a decision. It had to figure who could become available between now and the deadline. That would be a better alternative to Monahan. Maybe someone will. Who knows? Or let's take the guy that's available right now, because right now he's the best possible guy that we could get to help us out. And so, and I think the Jets have had their eye on Monahan for a while. It's been something that they've been monitoring for quite some time. And I think his character is something that's appealing to them. Like a big, I don't want to overstate it, but part of the reason the Jets have turned around this year is not only what they've added, but what they've subtracted. Blake Wheeler had kind of become a bit of a source of negativity, let's say, in Winnipeg. Obviously, Pierre-Luc Dubois, we don't need to talk about what kind of source of negativity he had become in Winnipeg. And so I think by bringing in someone who has demonstrated in Montreal an ability to integrate a new dressing room and be well loved as a teammate, which he clearly is and was by his Canadiens teammates, was probably a factor here as well, I would think, for a franchise that's sensitive to that, that's been through the Evander Kane situation, and with Dustin Byfuglien and Wheeler and Dubois and all these things that have kind of that have kind of messed with their chemistry. I think that was probably an important factor for them to consider.
We've heard a lot about people saying, well, if you want to make Sean Monahan your second line center at this point in his career, then you might not be a true Stanley Cup contender. But I think that the Winnipeg Jets are in a particular position because their set of wingers is so strong that if you put Monahan in between Cole Perfetti and Nikolai Ehlers, you've got a lot of raw talent there. A lot of guys a lot of health risks in all three cases, but a lot of raw talent. So I think it's an interesting bet, because they could not have remained, especially in the playoffs, going Scheifele and then a collection of Adam Lowry, which I like him a lot, but not as a second line center. Namestnikov, I think he's been used more on the wing these last few years, but he's not a top six guy.
Well, I think him and Perfetti were kind of rotating at center on that line, sort of, because neither of them can really win a draw. So it was a bit of an issue. Right.
And Kupari just came back, and he's not a solution either. So Monahan really fits the bill there. So I can understand why they were willing to pay this much. And for Montreal, I mean, it seems so. At this point, we enjoyed seeing Monahan, his contribution to the Canadiens, but let's not forget, the Canadiens got a first round pick to bring him on board, and they got another one to ship him out of town. So that's quite savvy.
Well, they now have 4 first round picks in the next 2 drafts. 2 of them are courtesy of Sean Monahan. So it's really something. But I want to talk, because I think this is really the most crucial part of this trade. And Kent Hughes, we should mention, was pretty forthright in a lot of things. It kind of mentioned that he didn't really have the possibility of adding a first round equivalent prospect here. So that would suggest that, excuse me, someone like Colby Barlow was off the table or Chaz Lucius was off the table in Winnipeg. Whoever else he was dealing with wasn't going to. What's that?
No. Well, I didn't say anything. I was just reacting. I mean, you could add Rutger McGroarty to that list.
Well, I think, I mean,
that goes without saying. But many of those teams did not even have a lot of interesting prospects that were the equivalent of those first rounders. You know, you can think of Colorado with Callum Ritchie, but I think that the Jets also had the most interesting pool of those first round equivalent type of prospects. And but they were denied.
But all of those prospects, arguably, well, just based on their draft position, but even where they are now, are still worth more than wherever the Jets pick will land, which, you know, is likely to be in the late 20s, mid to late 20s. So anyhow, so that option wasn't available, according to Ken Hughes, in any of the talks that he was having. So it was going to be a first round pick. But the salary retention part is important here. And I think really the trade somewhat hinged on that in the sense that, you know, Ken Hughes suggested that maybe some of the teams he was talking to would have needed him to retain salary on Sean Monahan to make the deal. Maybe that would have upped the price a little bit. But choosing to keep that salary retention slot, their last salary retention slot until July 1st, he said they deemed that to be more valuable than whatever they could have gotten for retaining salary on Sean Monahan. So the Jets, among the rumored teams who are out there looking for some help at center, Boston, New York, Colorado, obviously Winnipeg. I mean, of those teams, there are, you know, maybe a handful of others. The Devils, Carolina, maybe, we don't know, but it's the Winnipeg was one of the few that had the space to take Monahan and not only absorb his whole salary, but still have room to do other moves afterwards.
Yeah.
So now the Canadiens, you know, I mean, if people are like, I think you were reading a tweet earlier off air when you were like, well, now what do we do? You know, kind of thing. Like, what do we have left to do now? Sean Monahan's gone.
Well, look at Jake Allen.
Look at Jake Allen. Look at a lot of other people on the team. Like, this opens up this, like, there are possibilities that remain open for Montreal that would have closed had they had to retain salary on Sean Monahan. And so the fact that they didn't have to allows the possibility of a Jake Allen trade, allows the possibility of a number of things. You know, there's still 5 weeks till the deadline. Like, things could shake out, you know, and where if you want to, I don't know. I mean, if Yoel Armia keeps playing like that, although I can't imagine he will without Sean Monahan there, but it's you know, if there's any, Ken Hughes was asked about David Savard at the end of the press conference by François Gagnon. And to me, the market seems ripe for the Canadiens to get a haul if they were ever to put David Savard on the market. And Ken Hughes kind of deftly answered the question saying, I can't say at this time that we are actively looking to trade David Savard, but things change. You know, he began that answer with a preamble saying, well, I'm always open to anything, and gave like the hypothetical of if Connor McDavid became available for a trade, I'm going to try and put together an offer. But the fact that he's not shopping David Savard, you know, I'm just using this as an example. You know, they might not wind up trading him, but if teams, you know, if Chris Tanev gets traded, for instance, and there are a number of teams around the league that are looking at him, the teams that don't get him are going to start looking around and seeing what's out there. And I wouldn't be surprised if teams started calling about the willingness to trade a David Savard. And now that you still have that retention slot, even though it's not an exorbitant amount for David Savard, it's $3.5 million, but it's $3.5 million next year as well. If the price were to get high enough and you have to retain on him in order to pull it off, the Canadiens now have that option. So and again, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but it's a possibility that's open to them, and you can apply that same logic to a number of players on the roster.
Right. But I think that, you know, when he says that the retention slot is more valuable being used on potentially another player, I think that it would earn them more benefits to use it for Allen than for Savard, because you could keep Savard and still get an interesting return for him next year, barring any significant injury.
Plus, they need him right now.
And they need him right now, whereas Allen, if they could move him, that'd be good. There are plenty of teams that are looking for help between the pipes, and if you don't have a robust enough market just by offering him and shopping him around, well, say absorbing 50% of his salary all of a sudden makes him a lot more interesting, because some of those teams, let's say LA, well, they could then add Allen and still have some money to do something else afterwards. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not the GM.
Pretty awkward that LA has Cam Talbot at the All-Star game, and he basically just lost his job to David Rittich in LA.
Yes, I know. Yes. I know. My God, what a tailspin for that team. Huh? They fired, obviously, the other big news today with Todd McClellan losing his job. It's crazy, and that whole Pierre-Luc Dubois thing has turned into a shit show over there. But yeah. But we had discussed that issue about salary retention slots, and I think it was something that, considering the low salary of Monahan, this was a tool that the Canadiens had, that we can offer you a quality centerman without him being a burden on your salary structure. So the fact that Hughes was able to get a first round pick without retaining any money, that's even more impressive. Because getting a first pick but having to retain some of the salary would have been, it had been floated around. I think that Pierre Lebrun had mentioned that, but now it's the best of both worlds. They get their pick and they keep their retention slot open. So that's great.
Yeah, and I was actually wondering, when it was Pierre Lebrun who broke it this morning that Sean Monahan was going to Winnipeg without any terms. So there was this void of like a half hour or something where we didn't know anything about the trade. Yeah. And I was wondering the extent to which the Canadiens' own second round pick in 2024 was involved, because in order to present an offer sheet, the Canadiens need that pick back. Now, I'm not saying the Canadiens are going to do that, but maybe, I would imagine that's what the Jets were initially offering. Because really, you're looking at a difference of like maybe 10 spots in the draft between the Jets' first rounder and the Canadiens' own second rounder. It wouldn't be that dramatic, 10, 12 spots different. Maybe the Lindholm deal pushed the Jets up to their own first round pick instead of giving up that second rounder. I don't know. I guess the Canadiens don't consider it all that important to be able to present an offer sheet. Maybe they don't intend on doing that, but I did think if that was, maybe that was the pivot point, when Lindholm got traded, when they accelerated things, maybe the Jets, and I'm just speculating here, I don't have any actual knowledge of this, but, maybe they moved off trading Montreal their own second back, which ironically they got in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, which the Canadiens avoided, dodged a bullet there with that one. But yeah, so getting the first as late as it is a significant development, and I wasn't convinced that they'd be able to do it. So kudos to Ken Hughes and listen, like the last two drafts, the Canadiens have acquired NHL roster players in return for first round picks. Granted, the Doc trade was the Islanders pick, which was 12 or 15, something like that. It was in that range. It was 13. 13, yeah, 13th, and required moving Romanov and all that. But I mean, Newhook was a late first and an early second that got the deal done. So this front office has already shown a history in their first two drafts of being willing to part with picks to acquire young roster players that fit a certain age category. So even though the Canadiens weren't able to get that player now for Monahan, doesn't mean they're not going to be able to use what they got for Monahan, and perhaps even what they got for taking Monahan to begin with, in order to acquire a player like that. Because again, I don't know just how the Canadiens aren't going to trade away all their picks, but they're definitely open to trading away picks for players at this stage, because they have a lot of prospects and they have a lot of picks.
Well, if you trade 2 first-round picks, one in 2024, another one in 2025, then it's a different quality of player that you get. and they can be looking at guys that maybe are a couple of years older than Doc and Newhook, or guys that are earning more money. But I think we're going to enter a territory now with all those picks where they're going to get aggressive in trying to make themselves better rapidly. So, because the first round pick of the Winnipeg Jets being a late 20, it's not in itself is not going to be worth a ton. But you package it with something else, then it might become interesting.
Well, I mean that Flames pick in 2025, like basically the only way the Canadiens don't get that pick, and again, the conditions on that pick are mind-numbing. I don't know how many people refer to the site Pro Sports Transactions, but they have a registry of all the picks that are traded, and for this pick, the Flames pick in 2025. The header is pick may or may not transfer depending on absurdly complex conditions.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it has a whole paragraph to discuss the conditions. But basically, if my understanding is, anyhow, it's highly likely that the Canadiens will either get the Flames or the Panthers' first round pick next year in 2025. Most likely the Flames. So, that pick with what's going on in Calgary risks being decent. I don't know how far down Calgary's going to go between now and the 2025 draft, but that pick probably won't be in the 20s, and so it's, or might not be in the 20s. So you're looking at some pretty good assets here. And if you look at the Canadiens sort of haul of draft picks, yes, it's a lot, but now they have 2 firsts, 2 thirds, and 2 fifths in 2024 to go with 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and 2 fourths in 2025. So, I don't really care much about the 3 seventh rounders they have in 24, but and even if you take out the 5th rounders this year, but you have 2 firsts and 2 thirds plus 2 picks in each of the first 4 rounds next year. That's a lot of ammunition to be active on the trade market. And I think that's exactly what the Canadiens intend on doing.
If we go back to the trade itself, and 24 hours earlier or 36 hours earlier, it was Elias Lindholm going from Calgary to Vancouver. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's easy to say, well, this led to that. But to which extent do you think that it was correlated? Was it more in the value that the Canadiens were able to extract for Monahan, or is it more in the timing of it? Because I find it very interesting. You started by saying how you should send a basket of flowers to Jim Rutherford for doing it so early in the season. It gave the Canadiens the luxury of time to build a market and make sure that they get the best value that they can for Monahan. And yet they didn't waste even a day, and they moved on right away.
Listen,
so I think that the timing of the whole thing is really interesting.
Well, and Ken Hughes was asked, was Sean Monahan's injury history a reason why you did not wait? He denied it in the sense that, they had no questions about his injury history. That's when he mentioned, the fact that Edmondson was injured for most of the deadline period last year, how Ekholm and Orlov presented themselves as options late in the game and how that affected the market. Mm. He gave all sorts of reasons why this had nothing to do with Sean Monahan's injury history. I would take him with a grain of salt on that. I think it's fair to say, and he said, listen, there's always a risk of injury with any player. It's fair to assume that there's a bit more of a risk with Sean Monahan than there is with others, just because of his history. And even though last year had nothing to do with his hips, and I talked to him about it early this season, his hips have never felt better. He really does not have the hip issue. The hip issues are behind him as far as he's concerned. Yeah. But it just happened to be that he broke his foot. The foot led to a torn groin, and the torn groin is actually what prevented him from being traded last year. And so I think there is some of last year's experience that stuck with Ken Hughes and said, do I really want to push my luck? And because how much more was he actually going to get for Sean Monahan? He was going to get a first round pick. It was going to be in the similar range of pick. Like, the teams that are involved are all probably in the top 5 to 7 in the league standings. Will probably finish somewhere in that range. Are probably going to be a similar pick in terms of value or quality. What else? How much more could you possibly get? And counter that with who else might present themselves on the market that would actually diminish that value and prevent you from getting a first round pick. So I think the fact that the timing turned out the way it did is there's a lot of factors here. I think the injury risk was one, but just getting the price that I think Kent Hughes had in his mind that he wanted, at a certain point, if you get it, you just got to be like, all right, I got what I wanted. Let's move on. And and not retaining salary, again, as we mentioned, allows them to further continue to collect assets between now and March 8th.
Yeah, I think had he waited longer, maybe that continual showing the level of play that he's shown in the past month, let's say, probably would have enabled the Canadiens to get a B-level prospect on top of a first-round pick, maybe.
Yeah.
But the risk of seeing him injured in the meantime, and we brought up in past episodes how recently he's been out of practice. He's been getting treatment instead of showing up for practice. It becomes a red flag once it starts happening too often. The risk was there, and probably that at some point, if you don't want, are you going to be greedy and risk losing the option of that first round pick in order to get the B-level prospect that the Canadiens might not need really?
Who has more B-level prospects than the Canadiens?
Well, that's it. They got a ton of them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think they had at this point determined that if they were not able to get like the type of prospect that they were looking for, that they had moved on. But it's not just the Canadiens that pulled the trigger at this point. It's also the Jets that decided to be aggressive and say, this is our offer today. So, and I think I look forward to hearing from Kevin Cheveldayoff in about an hour and a half from now. He might shed a bit of light on that, but it's I think there was also probably pressure on the side of the Winnipeg Jets to act quickly to make sure that they wouldn't fall behind and they end up empty-handed at the end.
Well, who else was interested in Sean Monahan? Has been interested in Sean Monahan since last season. It's the Colorado Avalanche, and who has their first round pick this year? It's the Colorado Avalanche. So Colorado Avalanche and the Winnipeg Jets and the Dallas Stars are fighting to finish first in the Central, with the prize being that you don't have to face one of the other teams in the first round of the playoffs. That's going to be whatever that 2-3 battle is in the Central Division. That's going to be a tough series. That's going to be the best series of the first round, I would think. Yeah. And avoiding that has a certain value, and there's going to be an arms race. So they jumped up. They had to be decisive here, and so good on them. And Kevin Cheveldayoff has a reputation of being a highly methodical, perhaps overly patient general manager, but didn't hesitate in this instance, and probably recognized again that the market as it stands today, this is the best option that's available. And could that change in the next few weeks? Because teams are going to fall out of the race. And if some of those teams decide to throw someone else in the market that no one expected, then yeah, maybe you could get. But now, the Jets have Monahan. They give him an extra 5 weeks to sort of acclimate himself to his new team. I think it's a good move for Winnipeg. They have, and it's not like they're bereft of prospects. Like, that's the thing with Colorado, is that if they give up their first round pick, they don't have a second, they don't have a third. And they don't have many prospects. So it's probably a tougher decision for them. So Winnipeg recognizing that and saying, listen, we have a decent prospect pool considering where we are in the standings. We can pay this price. Let's just do it and get the guy that we want. So I wish more GMs were like that. Stop waiting for the deadline and waiting, hoping to extract that one little extra asset turning a fourth into a third or something. When you get the guy you want at the price you were willing to pay, just do it. Yeah. And so kudos to Cheveldayoff for doing that.
The Boston Bruins are probably in need of another centerman, but they don't have their first round pick. They have a depleted cupboard of prospects, and they've got hardly any money.
And they have no cap space. Yeah.
So it'll be very difficult for them to get better, to improve at the deadline in that situation. So it might be a money in, money out type of situation. Other teams probably would have been in the mix too. You could easily find 6 or 7 teams. I mean, Colorado could improve. Carolina could improve down the middle. Washington, if they think that they have any chance of making the playoffs. Toronto, the Rangers, obviously, but those are all Jersey. Those are all difficult teams to deal with. So from
money's tight, and money's tight. Yes, so I think. And I thought, maybe we'll just close on this, but Ken Hughes made a point of mentioning that, he spoke to Sean Monahan basically when all the rumors started flying around to call him and say, hey, the rumors are true. Everyone even Sean Monahan himself knew he was going to get traded, even wanted to get traded, according to, sort of Ken Hughes talking about the contract negotiations over the summer to bring him back for a year. He's going to be missed in that room. I think you just need to speak to the intangible qualities of veteran players on a rebuilding team. Like, anytime you asked Juraj Slafkovsky about Sean Monahan, like, his eyes would light up, and it was really just how much he enjoyed talking to him on the bench, asking him questions about certain things and their discussions of their previous shift, especially when they're on the same line together, but even when they weren't. Juraj Slafkovsky loved that guy. Cole Caulfield took like 10 minutes after the trade was announced to sort of give a shout out to Monahan on his Instagram story. He was a really, really well-liked presence in that room. And in that sense, he's going to be missed. And just from a pure hockey sense, he's going to be missed. Ken Hughes mentioned that Alex Newhook should be back shortly when he was asked about the current center depth on the team, which suggests that when he does come back, Alex Newhook's going to be back at center, which was not a very good experiment at the beginning of the season, obviously necessitated by Christian Dvorak's injury, and he's also injured again now. So I guess we could expect Alex Newhook to come back as a centerman, which is not ideal, but we all knew
it will do for now.
Exactly.
I mean, his longer prospect with the Montreal Canadiens to be a winger, but I think that for the time being, the fact that he's got that versatility, this is a situation where they need him at center. That's where he'll play. Basically, I mean, he's not the same centerman than Monahan is on many aspects, but it's going to be a status quo. They'll have the same number. It's not as if they lost a centerman because they'll have Monahan, they'll have Newhook as third line center. They'll keep rotating those guys brought up from the Laval Rocket probably for the rest of the season. So I don't know if it's always going to be.
He'll be second line center, really. I mean, if
of course,
and obviously Evans is there, but but again, just it speaks to just the lucid nature of this front office. When Ken Hughes at his midseason thing kind of said, our plan won't change regardless of what the team does. We're going to continue on our long-term plan of making this team better in the future. It's difficult to hear, but Nick Suzuki watched that press conference that day. And while much of it was in French, and I think that specific line from Ken Hughes was in French, I think Suzuki understands enough French to understand what Ken Hughes is saying in French. Mm-hmm. And, I spoke, speaking to him after the game that night, it's hard for him to hear that we're going to be sellers. I hate selling at the deadline, but it's up to us to put management in a position where they decide not to sell. And no matter what happened between now and March 8th, that wasn't going to happen this season. And Hughes made it clear. I mean, that night the Canadiens beat the Avalanche, for crying out loud. Like, it wasn't as if, they went out and beat a top opponent, but status, the plan was going to remain in place. Now they've executed one part of it. And by not retaining salary on Sean Monahan, I think they've left themselves open to execute another part of it between now and March 8th. So all told, 2 first-round picks come here thanks to Sean Monahan, and the Canadiens remain open for business between now and March 8th. So I think on all levels, this is a win. You can quibble over whether they could have gotten more for Sean Monahan. I personally don't think they could have gotten much more. And now you don't have to worry about him getting hurt between now and March 8th. So I think there's a lot of things to like about this deal for the Canadiens.
That news though makes Nick Suzuki's weekend even worse than it had already started to be.
Did you see his sad face during that draft?
I know.
Like he's just sitting there. He's like, "Am I going to be the last pick? Am I going to be in that group of 4?" And
sad puppy face.
Sad puppy face. All my buddies are on a beach somewhere, and I'm here waiting to be picked last.
Yeah, I think he would have taken the beach after after a few appearances at the All-Star game. I mean, he put on a brave face yesterday because I was in Toronto for media day, around the All-Star weekend. But I'm sure that for some guys, it's clearly they're super happy to be there. Others, they could do without. And Sidney Crosby skipped the draft and decided to go skate on an outdoor rink in Montana.
Yeah, exactly.
and show up at the very last minute possible.
In full equipment. I found that weird. Yeah. He's alone on an outdoor rink in full equipment, but that's besides the point. But anyhow, so I think Nick's reaction that night is probably echoed among his teammates in the sense that they hate being in this position, but you know what? I mean, if Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon play their cards right, maybe this time next year they won't be in that position. But it'll be up to them to show that they merit that. And, but for now, this was a good return on Sean Monahan. And for Sean Monahan's sake, let's hope things go well in Winnipeg. He can have a strong playoffs for them and come out with a really good contract. But the other bit that Ken Hughes mentioned is that, based on where they are, like to all the people who said, we'll just sign Sean Monahan, Ken Hughes admitted based on where we are, we could not offer him a reasonable contract with our future being cloudy as it is right now. Like they don't have a clear vision of what they'll be in the future. So they couldn't offer him a reasonable contract, which again, to me, is going to be somewhere. The floor for that contract is 4 years, $5 million a year, probably higher than that on a money basis. Now Sean Monahan has an opportunity to go and get that contract somewhere. So yeah, good for him and good for the Canadiens. I
didn't agree with you at first on that, but then I went to look at the comps and that's what he's looking at. It's definitely at a $5 million range. You look at the other guys that got, that were in his position in terms of age and becoming a UFA, and that's a lot of those centermen who had a roughly, if you look at all those that were, let's say, that were able to get between $3.5 million and $6 million, and between 4 and 6 years, it's all guys like Brock Nelson and you had Peugeot that was some time ago, but he looked favorably compared to all those guys. Cop and Comfort, my God, that's a law firm. So that those
Monahan, Cop and Comfort would be a good LLC.
So he looked favorably compared to those guys. So that's why it would be too rich for the Canadiens and actually would make no sense at all.
Yeah, so probably won't make sense for the Jets either. But I mean, it's the price of doing business. So, but I think honestly, from everyone's standpoint, from the Jets standpoint, from the Canadian standpoint, from Monahan's standpoint, this is a win all around. Of course, Monahan has to perform for the Jets for it to be a win for him, but I'm pretty confident he will, and he'll be a welcome addition to that dressing room, a veteran presence that will contribute there. So, yeah, win-win-win is what you're really looking for in any trade, and I think this is that.
Yeah, lose. That's what's Canadians going to do the rest of the season, though. We're going to see a lot of sad faces towards there's 32 games left. it's going to hit the morale of that group. I mean, Martin St. Louis got
33 games left.
33?
Yeah.
Martin St. Louis got a lot of work to do to keep the spirits high and make sure that his guys stay on message and they stay with their eyes on the prize.
All right, well, we're going to wrap it up there. This is sort of a quick, because obviously Marc-Antoine and I have to write about this right now, so we wanted to get this out of the way. But thank you for listening. We'll be back on Monday. We'll bring Future Friday back next week, and maybe between now and then, we'll see. We'll take a look at the NHL draft and see what this pick might mean if the Canadiens decide to use it to draft a player. But until then, we'll be back on Monday. A reminder that Monday it will be our mailbag segment. So if you have questions for the mailbag, you can email them to basuandgodin@gmail.com, or you can send them to us on X or Twitter @basuandgodin. So until then, have a good weekend. Marc-Antoine, it was nice talking to you again.
Yes, always pleasure to be talking. Yeah, talking to you is always fun.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
See you everybody. Bye-bye.